Haitian and New Orleans connections, the Haitian cultural influence in New Orleans. So we gonna start off getting into that. So one of the things a lot of people talk about first is the 1811 slave revolt in New Orleans. They say that the leader was Charles Dessalines. They'll say Charles Dessalines was Haitian. Well, let's get into it. So, a little background on Charles Dessalines. They say he was born of a white planter and a black enslaved woman, so he was mulatto. They say he worked as a slave driver of the white planter Manuel Adri. Dessalines was monitoring the work of Andre's enslaved people and punished them when they weren't working hard enough. So he actually used to discipline the slaves and beat them. But obviously, we know he was working as a double agent. He was just doing that to bedrock the slave owners into thinking that he was like them, but obviously he wasn't the whole time. It was all just an act. So as far as his birth, there's actually many people that argue that he wasn't born in Haiti. For instance, Robert L. Paquic, he says that neither a free person of color nor Haitian origin. Charles Dessalines was a mixed race slave driver, most likely born in Spanish Louisiana. Then you have another one from Gwendolyn Meadow Hall's position. She argues that Dessalines was born a Louisiana born slave. Here you have another. This is from a African American registry. Says, contrary to many published articles, we do not know if Dessalines ever brought Charles over from Saint Dominique, that's present day Haiti. And here's one of the sources y'all can read. This is a registry.org. You can read for a source because I always provide the sources for things that I say. Now let's get into the so-called founder of Chicago, Jean Baptiste Point du Sable, or however you pronounce his name. They said the founder of Chicago was a Haitian man. Also to add on, so historian Milo Milton Quefi, he actually argues that Dessalines was actually born in Canada. He was they actually say he had a French Canadian and African connection. So him being born in Haiti is not it's not proven. It's suggested. It's suggested. It's not proven. Like we just stated, a lot of other historians argue he was a French Canadian or American born. So Jean Baptiste Point Disable. They say that the founder of Chicago was a Haitian. Let's get into that. Let's see. For starters, there's no solid proof that he was born in Haiti either, although some people say suggest. Historian Milo Milton Queffley, he says that the fact that he was a native of San Domingo is largely fictitious and wholly unauthentic. He later put forward a theory that DeSable was of African and French Canadian origin because the whole idea that he comes from Haiti, that's just that was based off of one woman's. It was from like a claim, something that one woman said in the memoir or something that he was a native of Haiti. Yeah, but that can't be authenticated. And there's many historians who argue he was French of Canadian origin. Here you have it. Historian Milo Milton Queffley regarded a Kinsey's account as largely fictitious and wholly authenticated, later putting forward the theory that he was of African and French Canadian origin. And to put forth, so Chicago, the indigenous word for that is Chicago. That's derived from the Miami, Illinois language. So no, I don't know why he's considered the founder of Chicago. That the Chicago Trading Post or the Chicago Trading Post was already established before he got there. What he was the first non-indigenous person to come there and start trading. But the trade was already going on. He was the first non-indigenous person to come there with the European style trade because his father was white, a European. So he came there and he married an indigenous wife and used her connections and his father's connections to set up trade between the indigenous people and the whites. And that's how he became famous. But he did not create or start that trading post. He traded fur and other. Before Disable arrived in the 1770s to the 1780s, the area was already inhabited by the Potawatomi, Miami, Illinois, and other native nations. Chicago was already a strategic trade and portage route linking the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River system. Native nations had extensive intertribal trade networks. French traders had moved through the region since the 1600s, so trade absolutely existed long before DeSable got there. What he actually did, he married a Potawatomi woman, commonly known as Catherine, built a large permanent trading compound, traded fur, grain, livestock, and goods, became a major middleman between the native nations and the Europeans. You see, he was strategic by marrying a native woman to use her family's connections to get into that trading system. And he was using his father's white European trading like system. So he became a buffer in that post between the indigenous people and the white settlers. And I also should note that John Baptist Point DeSable, he wasn't really officially recognized as the founder of Chicago till 1968. So it's a rather new thing of saying he was the founder of Chicago, in which we just explained that he wasn't the founder. He was just the first non-indigenous person to come to that trading post. He was of mixed African and white descent. He was a mulatto. So a lot of other people would say that, oh, well, there's a lot of Haitians who migrated to New Orleans before the Emancipation Proclamation. So let's get to exactly let's exactly break down those numbers. So they say it was about 10,000 people. Out of those 10,000 people, about 3,000 were white. About another 3,000 were free people of color, which were basically mulattoes, and another 3,000 were what you would call black people. So, from the New Orleans mayor's official tally, January 1810, for the last refugee wave counted, 2,731 of those people that came from Haiti were white. 3,102 were people of color, mostly described as mulatto, but there were some black people in there, but well, most of them were described as mulatto. And 3,226 enslaved people, or commonly referred to people who were black. The total tally was 9,059 people. The reason that you see 10,000 by early 1810 is because the rivals continued beyond that point, but was captured in the January count. This is probably why New Orleans has a very high population of Creole people, which means mixed or mulatto. There's a lot of white people coming in from Haiti, a lot of mulatto people coming from Haiti, and then the indigenous people and the black slaves that were there already there who started mixing together. Where does the word okra come from? Excuse me, where does the word gumbo come from? Gumbo is an African dish, so they say. This is what a lot of they be saying. So it's not completely black and white. Gumbo is a Gumbo is an African vegetable or that comes from Africa. It was a main ingredient in what became known to us as gumbo, but gumbo was made, excuse me, or before it was called gumbo stew, that was made by the indigenous people. They would use sassafras leaves or file as thickener. So as you see, the indigenous people were already making what they would call stews and using different indigenous thickeners that they would use like sassafras. But once the arrival of the Africans came, they introduced gumbo as a thickener into it, and that sort of became more so known as the gumbo that we eat today. But it doesn't always have to include okra. A lot of people make gumbo without okra. If you don't use okra as a thickener, a lot of people still use sassafras. So the name gumbo, they'll say that it comes from an African word, but it's actually more so linked to an African woman named Kumba, who was mentioned in the 1760s New Orleans documentation when it comes to a dish. And here's the source for that. This is docsK4BL.org. That is the source for that. Oral scholarships notes a long-standing pattern: okra when available, file or sassafras when okra wasn't available. So okra doesn't make or break gumbo. It can be made with or without it. Okra, using okra and gumbo is more so like I guess what you would say in terms of America, the newer way. They started making it that way once Africans came. Using sassafras is more so the indigenous way. And also here we'll notice as far as is the word gumbo an African word or is it a Choctaw word gumbo? The name gumbo is best supported as an okra word from African languages, Louisiana French English, while the Choctaw Gumbo Ashish record is powerful evidence for indigenous file tradition, but not descriptive proof as the English word gumbo comes from Choctaw. Here you have here. Choctaw and other southern indigenous stews did not rely on okra. They used starches native to their food systems: corn, hominy, and sassafras leaves. When okra came to Louisiana, it arrived in the Americas through Atlantic slave trade brought by enslaved Africans who grew and cooked it in a colonial context, including Louisiana in the early 1700s. So that's around the time okra came here and got popular. Before that, people kind of made the what would be called gumbo with sassafras. Before that, with the and then, so once the French came with their Andules and this and that, and the African slaves came with their okra, and then mixed that in with the already indigenous foods, that became known as what we call gumbo today, which is a combination of all three cultures coming together.